Hello, ladies and gentlemen, my name is TB Skine, and there's a new League of Legends comic. A new League of Legends comic fairly recently after the release of the previous comic about Darius, Blood of Noxus. Now we have NAMI, Into the Abyss. And I'm very pleased by this, because I have been on Riot's ass for ages, criticizing them for not putting out enough comics, for not making enough comics about their universe, about their characters. Comics are a fantastic medium for world building, for defining the visual style, for creating images, literally, of a universe in the minds of the people who engage with the IP in other ways, and it's been very disappointing to me that Riot has not been more active in putting out comics, so now they're putting out comics, apparently. I hope this isn't just two one-off things and then they go back into, hibernation and do nothing for 8 months. We've seen them do that many times before. I hope this is going to be a regular thing, because both of these comics are quite fantastic, as we shall briefly see. But the first thing we're going to do, before we get into the comic at all, is we're going to read the credits. The writer of this comic is Rayla, Heide, or Heide, and I'm gonna mispronounce every single one of these names, so apologies to the people who might be affected by that. Unfortunately, I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these. The art and the covers by Viviana Medeiros, Medeiros, I'm not sure how to pronounce that one either. I follow her on Twitter. She's a fantastic artist. If you want to have good art pop up on your feed sometimes, you should follow her too. The editor is Ellie, Pyle. The art director is Canete. The production artist is Gabriela, Downie, and the logo design is by Idette, Winecoor. However that one is pronounced. Now, I'd start with the credits, because it's just like one of my little artist affectation things. I'm very particular about artists being given credit for their work, and in the age of the internet, that often doesn't happen, so I'm gonna, walk the walk of my own talk and start with the credits on this thing. The comic's NAMI, Into the Abyss, and the first most interesting thing to note about it is the format of the layout. Now, according to the Universe website, the comic has 98 pages, but it kind of doesn't, because the comic looks like this. The entire comic is laid out in one endless, incredibly long, tall column, descending all the way down to its conclusion. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. So one of those is narrative. We're dealing with the deep sea, and the comic is very much about NAMI diving to the depths of the sea. So the format of the comic supports that. But more interestingly, if you're familiar with comics discourse and comics academia, you might be aware of a guy called Scott McCloud. He's a comic artist and a theoretician who has for a long time been arguing about the possibilities of new formats in the age of the internet. That is to say, with the age of comics on the internet, you no longer have to be confined to the idea of, air quotes, pages. You don't have to make your comic, in discrete pages that you have to flip through like it's a magazine. You can use the infinite possibilities, the infinite canvas of the website to do completely new things with narrative. Now, a lot of that is kind of pretentious wank, at least in my opinion, but in this case, this is one of the demonstrations of what is actually possible to do in terms of using the format of a comic to communicate the feeling. And we're going to get into that in just a minute, but first, let me just say the art on this thing is universally pretty stellar, I have to say. And you can kind of tell when you just look at it. It's very well rendered, it's very well drawn. The colors, the use of color is fantastic in this thing, and we're going to get into that as well. And the use of color symbols, man, I could talk about that for a long time, but Vivian did a fantastic job with the artwork on this thing. This is a monster of a project. I can't believe she was able to keep it a secret for so long. But it's just, it's fantastic and it's very good. You might already have noticed as I'm scrolling the ways that the colors, like the general color feel of the comic changes as we descend. Now, the comic itself is about Nami's origin story, essentially. The time that she dove into the depths of the ocean, all the way down to the ocean, to the bottom of the deepest ocean floor, to retrieve the moon pearl, which she must trade with, or not the moon pearl, the abyss pearl. It's one of those lore things that she trades with someone who lives on the land to get a moon pearl from them that will help protect them from the monsters of the deep. It's the origin story of how Nami became the Tide Caller, how she got her staff, why she has her powers, etc., etc. That's the thing that this thing is meant to tell. But since the structure of the narrative is very much about Nami diving to the deepest, darkest depths of the ocean, that's where this particular structure and this particular use of color comes in. Because what I want you to notice, first of all, we start on kind of light teal, sort of bright bluish colors, mostly hanging around. But the instant we start to descend, darker colors start to take over the aesthetic of the thing. But you can see she carries light with her. Light, by the way, is incredibly important to the narrative of this comic. This comic is all about the different meanings that light has in the depths of the ocean, the different meanings it has to her and her culture, and so on and so forth. There's a very strong interplay between light and darkness in the narrative of the comic, and we can discuss whether that narrative is well written. I have a lot of thoughts on that, but we're not going to get into that. But the artwork balances it fantastically with the way that you can see she dives into the depths and things get dark. So the source of light that she has with her brings the color of the waters higher up. These bright blue teal colors now emanate from her staff as she's descending. And as we descend further, you can start to see different color palettes start to take hold over the comic. All the blues are getting darker, obviously, but also here especially, see how purple begins to sneak its way in. Things get purple all of a sudden. Everything gets darker as well, but as we go lower and lower towards the seafloor in the narrative, purple starts to take over the sort of the color palette of the whole thing. And then we slip into a flashback, a reverie. She's remembering things, right? So now we're back up in nearer to the surface where her people live. And now the colors are they're not just teal, they're extremely teal and bright and beautiful and kind of luminous. Everything's glowing, there's light everywhere in these pages. And when the purple comes back, it's in the form of storytelling about the monsters of the deep. They are all represented by these dark, menacing purples, whereas everything that's to do with NAMI and her people is represented by bright teal colors. And this continues throughout the whole comic, and that's the brilliance of the color symbolism that's being used in this thing. Because as we leave the memory once again, everything gets purple, and more purple. In fact, purple becomes more and more of a powerful symbol. Now, occasionally the blues switch back in, but as you can see, these pages, like, really the only source of bright blue light is NAMI herself, and especially her staff. And here, when she relinquishes her staff, not only does the art style of the comic change to reflect, like, now she's swimming in the dark, she has no light, she can't see anything, she can only sense her way around, she can sense the movement of the water, and thereby she navigates. So the artist represents that by all of this beautiful rendering, all these beautiful colors and all this perspective and everything, and the renderings and the solidity and the color and the use of light falls away. Everything falls away. And instead of being these solid, defined things, like things are when you look at them, like when you see something, you can extremely clearly distinguish the shape of things. You know exactly the outlines of where is this thing, how big is it, where does it fit. But when you have to navigate by senses, by touch, by hearing, by smell, you don't have that clear outline of a thing. At best, you can build it up by touching stuff, but what's represented in the artwork here is that she can no longer see the colors of things. She can just barely sense the outlines of things, right? The jagged rocks around her, she knows they're there, but she doesn't really know what color they are. She's not entirely sure what the shape is. Even her own sense of self is kind of represented in that she feels the motion of things rather than truly knowing exactly what she's looking like at any point. So the art becomes more impressionistic. It's more about communicating the feeling that the character has than it is about communicating, what they actually look like. And that's a brilliant touch. That's a brilliant use of visual storytelling. We understand what she's feeling because we can see visually represented how she's feeling. And it's also a brilliant way to show the complete darkness, because the point here is that she's swimming with no light whatsoever. But without light, you can't see anything, and if you can't see anything, you can't draw anything. So in order to show, on the one hand, that everything is dark and you can't see anything, but also actually show what the hell is going on, this compromise is reached, where we get the outlines of things, but we don't actually get the things themselves. And that's just very clever. It's very brilliant. It's really well done, and it's really hard, by the way, to switch your art style like that in the middle of a project. It's hard to take that kind of risk because you don't know if it'll land. You can't be sure if the reader will get it. So just massive kudos. And again, light, purple light. So as the reader, when we get to this point in the narrative and we see purple light, we already understand, okay, that's not necessarily a good thing because everything evil so far in this comic has been purple. So now we're like, it's light, so we know she's reached some kind of destination, but, you know, purple light, not necessarily good. And this panel here, unfortunately, this is kind of where the format of the page fails this comic a little bit, because this is a fantastic panel. What it's meant to communicate is the incredible vastness of the cave that Nami has just found herself in. This is her here. If you remember Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf... No, not Fellowship of the Ring, this must have been in The Two Towers. When Gandalf falls into the lake fighting the Balrog, that incredible shot when they just tumble out of the ceiling of this cavern, this little flaming dot over this huge, impossibly expansive lake. Like, that sensation of someone tiny swimming through incredible vastness. That's what this page is meant to communicate. But because the format of the page is a very narrow format, like it's very narrow on the page of the website, it's really hard to get that feeling across properly. Like, the artist does a fantastic job of getting it across. Vivian does a fantastic job of getting it across nonetheless, but the format kind of screws it up a little bit. Like, because it's always... This is also part of the point of the very long, wide format, is it's claustrophobic, and it works brilliantly here, right? When she's swimming without her sense of direction, that very narrow format of the comic helps reinforce that sensation of being squeezed, of being trapped on all sides that Nami is feeling when she's swimming around without light. And a lot of the comic, by the way, is based in sensations of constriction and confinement, and the only open space, like, also notice this, like the use of space in the memory previously up here, lots of open expansive spaces, like lots of just open blue water, not a care in the world. But once we hit, you know, she's actually doing stuff here, she's confined in the cage, in the rib cage of a dead sea creature. Here you can see the bubbles and the suction. Everything kind of, it constrains, it confines around the characters, it confines around the action. Like, there's so little open space, everything's trapped all the time. And that's part of the brilliance of this format. You see tentacles here and everything. Is that the more we dive, the more trapped we become by everything, constantly. So that's the brilliance, is that it helps reinforce that sensation of being trapped. The only time it doesn't work, the only time it kind of fails, it kind of doesn't work, is when we need that moment of transcendent sort of, holy crap, this is big, this is huge, this is wide. Now, Nami's sensation here is probably still that sensation of being kind of trapped, but what's going on with her feelings at this part of the comic is also a kind of seductive pull. Like, she kind of wants to go there, she doesn't feel trapped so much as drawn. Which is shown quite brilliantly here. You see how all these jutting bits of rock point out this is where she's going, right? Point out over, like, all of it, like it's both pointing you in there, it's guiding you in there. You want to go into this hole, but it's also like, it looks like a mouth, right? A mouth that might trap you. And again, you can see the constriction of the scenery waiting to close around her. Like, it's almost like these are lobster claws, right? That are waiting to close in around her, to trap her. As it almost does. And that's the narrative of the comic here. By the way, notice how the color of Nami switches. Nami, up until this point in the comic, she has always been the blue in the image. She's blue here, even when she's surrounded by monsters. Blue, blue, blue. Everything about her is blue. Now when she's being seduced by the power of, I suppose it's the void that's leaking through or something, now that is kind of pulling on her, calling her, seducing her a little bit, she's purple. She's purple, sort of pinkish purple here. She's a pinkish purple blob here. Everything about her becomes this purple pinkish color. until she hits her hand on a rock and goes, whoa, okay, this is a bad idea. And you can kind of see that instead of being this very bright pink, illuminated by light, by the way, light again being used as a color symbol, she fades a little bit. She's not so brightly lit. She holds up her hand and braces away from the light. She kind of shields herself from the light of this thing that's pulling her, that's seducing her. Right? So when she pulls out of the light, of the purple light, she starts to move more towards regaining her blue light. And her blue light, which she regains literally here. Like, this is the moment when she overcomes the seduction, represented literally by her predecessor who swam down there, got seduced, and got taken in by the void. And now Nami has to complete his task, so she picks up his staff, his weapon, and instantly blue, bright, bright blue is reintroduced to the comic. The blue of her Tidecaller staff weapon. And that's when she starts regaining her heroic powers, where she starts figuring out, okay, what the hell am I supposed to do? How do I get back from this? And as she finds the thing that she's looking for, all the light is blue. This is the good light. This is the blue light. Now, here's the thing that's been established previously, is that light is a lure. Deep-sea creatures use light to trap their prey. In this case, the thing that's trying to trap prey is this void monster, which Nami manages to avoid quite handily by using the powers of the pearl. I think at least there's a moment of lack of clarity here where I think she's drawing on the power of this pearl to empower her natural control over the sea, to use that to escape. But it's not entirely clear. Like, I was a little bit in doubt whether that was what she was doing or whether she was just kind of summoning strength from within. Either way it works, because, again, look at the color of the wave of water she summons to beat back the sea beast. Bright teal, bright blue. This is the blue of her memory. This is the blue of her people. Of the top of the comic, the color symbol very much says, I choose not the void, I choose the other thing, and that power is what drives the purple monster back. And you can see here, even though the environment around her here is very purple, everywhere, she's blue now. Even in the purple environment, she's primarily dominated by blue colors. Which again, color symbols telling us what's going on here. Like representing things in a very clever and brilliant way. And this comic is just... the artwork is so top-notch. I really can't stress that enough. The use of color is just... it's clever. It's so clever. It's so good. And as we can see here, as we return towards the surface, all the colors of the environment brighten up, become bluer and bluer and bluer, until finally we get back to those bright teal, brightly pleasant open spaces. Again, everything that had been so constrained opens up again. No more massive pillars of stone or towers of dark stuff. Open space. Freedom. Like, no constriction. And this again is a moment where, if we wanted to be completely free with the canvas, this again would be a moment where I would maybe have said, okay, so let's widen the canvas now. Like some kind of gradient, like... gradient, what the hell am I saying? An angle, like widen the coming out like a wedge, almost like it opens up and widens out to show, oh, we're free of the constriction now. But that's a minor quibble, because the color symbols do the work. And again, you can see she's remembering the lure of the depths. The purple comes up again in her eyes. Like, I've talked mostly about color for this whole thing, because color really is the thing that's going on here. Like, that's the thing I want you to notice when you're reading this thing through, is notice the use of colors. Now, I have minor quibbles and criticisms, like these bubbles. I get what the artist was going for, but it kind of doesn't work. Like, they look unfinished. They look like scribbles. And this is meant to communicate the way that bubbles are these chaotic little rapidly flickering squiggles that just kind of through the water. Like, they have no defined form, really. If you look at a bubble, it's just... if you blow an air bubble underwater, it's this rapidly shape-changing thing that rushes towards the surface, right? So I think that's the feeling that they were trying to communicate here, but unfortunately, like, that one bright white line and just kind of circle that doesn't quite connect with itself, I don't think it works. But, you know, it's a minor quibble, but the story does take place underwater, so getting the bubbles right, I feel like is I think more effort could have been put into that. It's also because the bubbles are often so angular. You can see it here. Like, they're not rounded shapes that are being deformed. Like, that's what bubbles really are if you look at them. They are always round. They are always smooth, round shapes that are being pressed and deformed and squashed in different ways, but they're always smooth and round. The bubbles maybe could have used a little bit more work. And there are also times when, like, there are these panels like these occasionally where there's no characters and there's not really any action or anything going on. There's just this moment of silence, kind of, which helps communicate that we're moving towards greater and greater depths. But sometimes they feel a little too empty. Like this one here, for instance, opens up. We have all this constriction and claustrophobia going on in these previous panels, right? NAMI being surrounded by the seaweed and like this very narrow passage opening up, leading downwards and everything. Like, so that happens all the time. And then this one, unfortunately, opens the space. Like, this looks open. This looks, oh, well, there's not really anything constricting us. And then it constricts again as she's getting sucked down by the vortex or whatever this is. And here the bubbles look better, by the way, because they're more rounded and they're a little bit more complete, I think. And also because there's a lot more of them. I think the kind of squiggly scribble version of the bubble works best when there's a huge amount of them going on all at once, so that chaos really comes across. And another clever thing, by the way, I don't know if this is intentional, but notice how these tendrils of bubbles kind of look like octopus tentacles. Just a little bit. They look like tentacles grabbing onto her, pulling her down. Right? Which is just a very clever little thing, I thought. Using the imagery of the depths of deep-sea creatures to communicate. And also, this is difficult. Like, showing a dark shape in the darkness, that's hard to get right. Like, you have to be real careful about the colors to make that work. But yeah, honestly, I think that's the main thing I want to talk about. The format, which is very, very clever, very well done. I think they could have been more creative with it. They could have opened it up sometimes when it needs to be open, in order to reinforce the point of having it so constricted otherwise. And I think, like, minor quibbles about sometimes the bubbles aren't super well rendered. There are also times when I wish that the comic is all about colors, which means that a lot of things are represented just with color shapes, but there are some times where I just kind of wish that there would be more, like, stronger outlines for certain things. And I mean, it's hard to point out a particular moment, but there are times when, because everything is very much made of colors, it becomes kind of hard to distinguish shapes clearly on the page, and it's a minor quibble. It's not really a big deal. It's just, you know, small things that pop into my head as I read it. The use of this very simplistic kind of cave painting-y style is a good idea. It's effective. I don't think the sea monster quite works within the limits of that style. When you're doing these, like, this looks like it's kind of inspired by a Wind Waker-y sort of folk art, kind of South American inspired. Is something that's crept into stuff like The Legend of Zelda, with these very graphical representations of things. That's really hard to do right, and I think the sea monster, and sometimes the mer people, it doesn't always quite land. Unfortunately, like, it doesn't look quite cohesive and complete enough for me. And again, it's minor quibbles, because the point works and we get the point and we see it work. So it doesn't ruin anything. It's just quibble. And yeah, I think that's pretty much, I mean, I could nitpick this for ages if I wanted to, but no, this is a very good comic. The use of colors is absolutely freaking brilliant. And oh, by the way, right, there was that one sea monster after the flashback. which I found interesting just for a second because... Let's see, where is he? There he is. Does that remind you of Vel'Koz? Because to me, for some reason, this, like, the thing with the triangular thing there and the eye in the middle and then the tentacles coming... This thing looks like Vel'Koz to me. It's not Vel'Koz, obviously, because he's not in this comic and it's a sea monster, not a tentacle monster, but I just thought that was interesting. That might have been an intentional thing to reference... the fact that Vel'Koz is from the void and this creature is corrupted by the void, and so, you know, maybe that way, but yeah. And I've been trying to end this thing for like 2 minutes now. I should knock over my microphone and end it properly. My name has been TB Sky, and this comic has been NAMI Into the Abyss, written by Rayla, Heide, art and cover by Viviana, Medeiros. The rest of the credits you can see on your screen. Go read it for yourself. The writing is quite good as well. I'm not going to didn't go into it in this video because it's long enough as it is. And if you like this video, leave a comment down below if there is any questions you have about the comic and the methods it uses, or some stuff that you spotted that I didn't talk about that you wanted to hear something about. Leave it in the comments. I shall try to respond to as many as possible. You can leave a like if you like. You can leave a subscribe if you want to subscribe, or I can see you, I suppose, in the next video.